This video is brought to you by Patreon.
Hello, my name's Jeffrey, this is my channel Recollect, and you're tuned in for another episode of I Beat Every Non-GTA Rockstar Game.
Game number 21 comes to us in the form of 2005's The Warriors, a game that's a bit on the obscure side but does have its fair share of fans, me included. I've been familiar with this title for a long time, even played it a bit back in the day, mostly just the fun multiplayer modes. But before we get into all of that, let me first properly introduce you to this one-off Rockstar masterpiece. The Warriors is a game based on a film from 1979, which was actually based off a book from 1965, all with the same name, with the film adaptation having a particularly large cult following. That makes The Warriors Rockstar's fourth movie licensed game, believe it or not, and it's easily their best one. Some go as far to say The Warriors is one of the best movie licensed games of all time. Do I agree? Well, I haven't played all too many games based on movies, but I am quite familiar with the 1979 film, and I gotta say, they did do it justice here. The subsidiary responsible for the game is Rockstar Toronto, who after first getting acquired went as Rockstar Canada, but later changed to Toronto because of the company starting a second Canadian office, Rockstar Vancouver. This game is actually their only original title. After this, they merged with Vancouver and focused sadly only on ports. The Warriors is available on 3 platforms, PS2, Xbox, and then 2 years later on the PSP, with that being developed by Rockstar Leeds, another branch of Rockstar that we'll dive more into in a future video. But for now, know that they're mostly known for porting various Rockstar games, with their Warriors port being praised for how faithful it is to its console counterparts. Even though I own the physical game, I decided to go the PS2 emulator route purely for its much cleaner looking gameplay. When it came time to play, I of course chose the story mode, and once I did, I was greeted with 3 difficulty options: Sucker, Bopper, and Hardcore Soldier. So I went with the middle Bopper and began my playthrough. The story mode in The Warriors is 18 missions long and follows not only the entire plot of the film, but the first half of the game is spent detailing what the Warriors did leading up to the events in the movie. There are also bonus missions present here, which I did not complete but will quickly go over later. To catch you up on the film's plot, it starts off with a meeting of all the New York gangs. There's a man named Cyrus who attempts to establish a truce between all gangs, but is shot mid-speech, leading everyone to point fingers at the gang responsible for the murder. The real killer, Luther, from the Rogues, convinces the crowd the Warriors are responsible, which leads every gang to chase after and attempt to kill the group before they reach their home base in Coney Island. That all occurs at the 14th mission mark. Before that, you play as several different members in the group as they build their rep, fight a bunch of rival gangs, and perform several big and small tasks around the city to further establish the gang's legitimacy in the 3 months leading up to the meeting. The game actually allows the entire story mode to be played co-op, which is a neat option. You also are allowed to go back to specific missions and replay them, which is rare in a game like this. In my opinion, the game's 2 strongest qualities are the characters and the very atmospheric maps. I think Rockstar Toronto did an incredible job replicating the look and feel of the film. The locations have the same eerie, dingy vibe present in the movie. The mood is perfectly recaptured in my opinion. opinion. Some locations even reminded me of the dark and creepy locales in Manhunt and in Max Payne, especially with the subway sections. And for the characters, they're all surprisingly memorable. It's rare that I can remember all the names of a roster this big, but I do because each is unique and has a distinct personality. This is greatly helped by the fact all the characters share the likeness of the actors and actresses that played them in the film. That combined with most of the original actors returning to voice their respective roles as well. It leads to a unique situation where the video game adaptation feels like a true DLC continuation of the base movie. The story overall is really solid. I love when either shows, books, games expand on the lore of a film in a seamless way like this. Other games have attempted to do it, but none have had this many matching voices, faces, scenes, storylines. It all together is really magic. One of the voices who didn't return was Cyrus, played by actor Roger Hill, who once he saw his likeness was being used for the game, sued Take-Two, but they own the character's look and voice, so he didn't win. Not only are the main Warriors members well written and acted, all the new non-movie gangs and characters are also fantastic. What mine, and I assume many others' favorite aspect of the Warriors film is all the different gangs and their unique outfits with their different personalities and how they interact with each other. Here you get all the gangs from the film, plus a bunch more which are all clever in concept and feel very different from one another, and are seamless additions to the lore. Probably my number one favorite quality of the Warriors game is how some of the gangs have a mini boss like leader who is usually quite a bit larger. Their designs are sometimes very goofy and definitely wouldn't fit in the film, but I love them. By far my favorite character is Chatterbox, the giant fat clown leader of the Hi-Hats. I love that guy. Now, I won't spend too much time comparing the film to the game, but there are some noteworthy connections and changes that I want to highlight. On the surface, the 1979 film seems like a strange choice to adapt into a video game, but when you think about it, it fits super well with Rockstar. The characters are all very over the top, the subject matter is very violent, and how many times have you seen gangs in their other games? It's really a perfect match. Hell, there's even a Warriors song in Midnight Club 2.
Hurry up, bro, the race about to start. Oh, they wanna race Aguilar? No, they don't, boy. It's gonna get ugly on the road, you heard me?
When I originally saw the film way back in the day, I wasn't a massive fan, but I figured that now I'm beating the game, I should give it a rewatch. My thoughts the second time around, I actually quite like it. It isn't my favorite film or anything, but I really enjoy the multi-gang concept within the super grimy New York setting. That viewing occurred right before I beat the game, and upon first playing, I noticed right away how accurate they aimed to make the game. The entire intro matches nearly shot for shot with the movie. It's really impressive. There's so many cutscenes and parts of the game that do an incredible job replicating sequences from the film. Some of the cutscenes are pretty impressive too, with how many bodies they have on screen at a time. And yes, that iconic bottle scene is here, and it too is nearly identical. Every iconic scene is given justice here, and I think they did a great job translating those scenes into playable missions where you feel like you're actually taking place in the scene instead of just watching it. The radio voice narration from the film returns as well, but is expanded on here. Not only are there cutscenes with the radio voice, but she's also heard in the game over screens detailing who you lost against.
4 members of the Warriors were winded by the hurricanes last night. You can't stop a force of nature, boppers.
As well as playing on the radio in the hub area, filling in the story blanks between missions, which I thought was really neat.
The performance artists known as the Hi-Hats are regrouping after the loss of their leader, Chatterbox. Filling in is his understudy, Crackerjack, who's planning to direct the troupe back to their roots.
What I really liked about the story is how we get way more time with Cleon. In the film, he's killed off very quickly, but here he's got a way larger role. We even see him start off in the group The Destroyers, who you later spend a majority of the game fighting against. The Destroyers is actually one of the few completely new gangs made made for the game. There were a few interesting timeline discrepancies I noticed, first with the way the game introduces the gang, the Lizzies. In the movie, you just think they're a harmless group of girls before the gang reveal, but here in the game, they make it clear right away they're a gang, so you know something's gonna happen later on. The other confusing inclusion is in the film, when the Warriors meet the orphans, they appear to have never met before. But beforehand, in the game, during the mission Real Heavy Rep, you destroy the orphan leader Sully's car, which of course pisses him off, but in the film he doesn't mention it. Here in the game though, they add a line of dialogue that alludes to the previous car destruction. Just thought it was interesting. Despite the game's story covering a lot of pre-meeting warrior shenanigans, the game does end where the film does. But instead of just cueing a cutscene, the ending is drawn out into an epic final battle against Luther. I really respect how they didn't take the easy way out with the single knife throw and instead ended off with a longer sequence. At the end, there's even some added dialogue which further proves the Riffs knew of Luther being the real killer.
We blamed the wrong crew, babies. The Gramercy Riffs caught the real killer, a rogue named Luther. Too bad for the Warriors. They got smoked before the Riffs could help them out.
The effort the developers put towards replicating the film can't be understated. Hell, they maybe went a little too accurate. To describe the gameplay of the Warriors, I would call it an objective-based beat-em-up. Even though it doesn't fit the traditional side-scrolling brawler style, it's the way the game emphasizes large group melee battles which gives it that beat-em-up distinction. Like previously mentioned, you constantly switch off which member of the Warriors you play as. Each character has different moves and different strengths and weaknesses. Those different moves will come in handy with how much hand-to-hand combat you'll be partaking in. With nearly every mission having you fight hordes and hordes of enemies, you'll definitely have to get the combat down. The combat is pretty in-depth, but not to the point where it's overly difficult. In my opinion, the game really shines during the giant chaotic battles where you'll be fighting multiple guys at once, you'll be accidentally hitting your own guys and vice versa. The craziness of it can be frustrating, but fun. If you aren't great at pulling off the game's various combos, you can also use about anything you can pick up as a weapon. Scattered throughout every mission is a ton of items that have the ability to be used as weapons, some more effective than others, but that concept of using anything you see to fight with leads to countless goofy moments. When talking about unintentionally funny moments, never has there been a combat move more ridiculous than the horizontal jump available here that you can use against groups of people. I always found myself pulling that off whenever possible. Besides fighting non-stop, during each mission you'll have various objectives to complete, like spray painting over enemy tags, stealing certain items, framing other gangs, destroying various objects, but mostly just beating people up. During each mission, there are also optional bonus objectives that, if completed, gives you additional arenas, characters, and various unlocks for the yet-to-be-discussed multiplayer modes. I did not attempt any of those bonus objectives because I just focused on beating the core story. During some missions, you'll even take part in boss battles against the leaders of the various gangs. Those sequences normally had unique mechanics required to take the boss down. Those sections did a great job at switching up the, at times, monotonous gameplay. What also switched up the standard gameplay loop is these very unique platforming sequences where you have to run away from enemies within a unique perspective. Some of those sections contained some sort of cop-out quick-time events, but overall were very welcomed additions. If not already extremely obvious, this game does have a strong Rockstar feel. Several aspects of the game reminded me of their other titles. There's stealth elements similar to Manhunt, the large group fights reminded me of State of Emergency, and the soon-to-be discussed Rage mode reminded me of the Red Dead and Max Payne special modes. Of course, the game also shares many similarities with the GTA games as well. Too many to list, but here's a few that I noticed. Lastly, in between missions, you'll have the chance to roam around the Warriors headquarters hub area where you can access many of the game's modes and features. Just outside the hangout is a small chunk of Coney Island where you can complete 15 more bonus missions that unlock skills and items to be used on the main missions. Again, I didn't complete any of that stuff for time's sake, but I appreciate it existing, and the whole hub/Coney Island area is another great ambiance builder. Now that you have a basic grasp on the gameplay, let me break down some of the more unique mechanics present in the Warriors. With the game centering around fighting as a gang, you as the leader, aka War Chief, have a series of commands you're able to use on your boys to order them around. This is a feature of the game I found very unique and actually useful. I mostly use the Let's Go command to have them follow, the Wreck 'em All command to make them fight nearby enemies, and the Mayhem command which caused the group to smash everything in sight. There were others like the ability to have the guys hide from the cops, stay where they're at and not move, and the ability to have them defend an area. I really thought that was a clever way to integrate the gang teamwork aspect of the Warriors. Another interesting feature of the game is how you acquire cash and items, like health, aka flash, spray paint, and knives, which can either be picked up off of fallen enemies or bought from a dealer. Those three dealers can either sell you the product or sometimes just run off with your money. I did buy a lot of spray and flash, but no knives because those dealers needed unlocked. With the flash, you were actually able to use it to revive your boys, which I only did when it was required, otherwise I needed it for myself. Another interesting feature connected to that is if you go down or are arrested, you switch to a spectator mode where you watch and see if one of your guys can come and get you. I really thought that was a cool way to avoid the traditional immediate game over. Back to money making, you can earn cash in several ways, either by mugging civilians, robbing stores for jewelry or other valuables, or stealing car radios. Many features like these are accompanied by playing a sort of mini game, like finding the vibration to mug, avoiding the vibration to dodge an arrest, aligning the pins for lockpicking, spamming your bumpers to uncuff someone, and spinning the screws on a radio to steal it. All really neat and fun gameplay switch ups. Another previously mentioned mechanic you'll be doing a lot of is spray painting. You do this by using your joystick to match the W shape you're spraying. This can be very tricky and frustrating at times, but I think it's a neat mechanic that you eventually will get good at with time. There's also that rage mode I mentioned earlier, which can be activated once you earn enough combat style points. It's essentially a temporary invincible mode where you have extra strength and can pull off exclusive moves. To be honest, I wasn't the best at fighting this game, so I never fully utilized that rage mode. Lastly, there's an ability to work out in the hub area by either doing push-ups, sit-ups, chin-ups, or hitting the heavy bag, all with the goal of increasing your character's stamina. Just for the hell of it, I wanted to max out each one, which wasn't too hard, just a massive button smashing endurance test. Once I maxed out each one, I honestly didn't notice any major difference. It would have been more worth it if the characters bulked up like in San Andreas, but sadly nope. There are so many other mechanics I thought were clever, like the ability to pay the homeless to join you as a fighter, the ability to ask your fellow gang members to borrow their weapon, the ability to get and use the cops' handcuffs, and the ability to earn handcuff keys. Overall, so many cool features, too many to break down. I just wanted to make it clear how many unique mechanics are present in this game that altogether make it a very one-of-a-kind playing experience. You might be wondering if this was at all difficult, because at the end of the day, this is a challenge to see if I can beat every non-GTA Rockstar game, but for the Warriors, the short answer is not really. There were some notably tricky sections, but overall not even close to some of the other Rockstar titles. The game only took me 9 hours to beat, so decent, but they weren't an overly sweaty 9 hours, I'll say that. The game is laid out in a very linear style with maps that aren't too big, so I never really got confused on where to go or what to do ever. The mission objectives were easy to follow, the mini-map was easy to read, and most enemies weren't too difficult to fight. The parts of the game I consider the hardest include the section where you need to run around and tackle one of the orphans to interrogate them. That took me embarrassingly long to pull off. Also, the boss fight against Chatterbox. The whole time while fighting him, you have to avoid a roller coaster, which further increases the difficulty. Then there was the running sequence with the Turnbull ACs, which was difficult until I realized your controls are actually the opposite of what you'd think. Also, the boss battle against Virgil, made hard because of his super powerful hits. Hits so powerful, he actually clipped me through the world, requiring me to restart the entire mission. The final fight with Luther was a tad tricky as well, with having to dodge his gun, multiple projectiles, and several ground enemies. And lastly, the mission No Parley, No Penalty was pretty hard because it required you to go around and save all the handcuffed warriors. What made it difficult was all the non-stop tackle-happy cops, but the mission concept was so cool and different, it gets a pass. For a lot of the missions where there were just too many enemy spawns, I just decided to spam command my guys to follow me as I sprinted through the remainder of the mission until I reached the next checkpoint. Worth noting for the diehards out there is if you beat the game 100% on the hardcore soldier difficulty, you actually unlock a fourth, even harder difficulty called Unleash the Fury, where the Warriors player models are switched out for the baseball Furies. How awesome is that? Honestly, don't have much in terms of complaints when it comes to the Warriors. I did take note of a few things that bothered me, but nothing too major. First, like I said, the constant cop harassment, it got a little old. I get they have to be there because you're committing a lot of crimes, but the way they constantly slow down the gameplay with the incessant tackling was pretty obnoxious. My biggest issue with the game is easily the whack-ass camera. The camera movement in this game is no good. Even if you invert the controls, it just never feels right. In a game where you're fighting this much, especially against this many people, you need a rock solid camera, and this is far from. I don't mind the sections where the camera is locked into place, those parts were totally fine. It was just during the rest of the game where I became low-key queasy from the shaky camera. Plus, I really dislike how the selected camera perspective resets constantly. Overall, easily the weakest element of the game. A few smaller complaints are some occasional shoddy AI, the slightly repetitive W spray paint objectives, and the fact money never carries over even when playing the same character. But that's really it. Other than those few things, this game runs great, it's very polished, and legitimately fun to play. On a brighter note, here are all the different mission sections, little details, and overall aspects that stood out to me on my playthrough. Mission moment highlights for me included the awesome chase sequence that leads into the Chatterbox boss fight. During it, you have to outrun a roller coaster while dodging the ride's crazy decorations. The whole mission reminded me a lot of the Funhouse level in Max Payne 2. Another highlight is the graffiti showdown mission where you have to complete against the rival gangs on who can paint their logo the fastest. That premise was really different from the rest of the game and was quite fun. I also enjoyed the mission Paying the Cost, where you need to defend the various Coney Island shopkeepers using a variety of ridiculous weapons. And also, how can you not love the mid-credits bonus fight where you can actually play as the Riffs and beat up Luther even more. And for some more praise, the soundtrack is amazing. Not just with the iconic songs that carry over from the film, but the very atmospheric background music that's constantly playing, adding this uneasy, grimy vibe. It adds so much to the story's tone. And lastly, I just really like how you're always rolling around with a large team. Pulling up to a group of enemies with a squad this big behind you always felt badass. When everyone's fighting together, healing each other, freeing each other from police, it's really satisfying. And plus, I like how you and your boys are varied levels of bloody based on your current health. Really cool little detail. Now, as you know, I'm here for only the story mode, but I want to at least briefly touch on the game's other modes. Like I said earlier, back in the day, I used to play the multiplayer called Rumble mode. Within it, there are 9 smaller modes. I mostly stuck to the armying mode, where 2 gangs would fight with 9 to a side, but there's also one-on-one, where there's just 2 fighters, War Party, where it's 5 fighters to a side, Survival, where you can see how long you can fight off endless hordes of enemies, King of the Hill, where you have to defend a position the longest, Battle Royale, where you have to take out all the enemies in a confined space, Burner Battle, where you have to spray your logo the fastest like in the aforementioned mission. Then there's 2 very interesting modes. First with Wheels of Steel, where you race an opponent in a wheelchair, which is very unique and very hard. And then there's Have Mercy, a crazy game mode that has you throwing around the character Mercy in a sort of capture the flag sort of way. I can't believe that mode in particular isn't discussed more. How crazy is that premise? I do want to make a point and say that all these multiplayer modes are legitimately super fun and great couch co-op experiences. I highly recommend you check them out. I also have to mention how awesome is the create a gang feature that's in the multiplayer. Within it, you can create custom gangs to use in the various modes. The sheer amount of options you have here is insane. You of course have all the gangs, but the mini boss characters characters as well as just about every NPC player model in the game. I was blown away at the weird options here. Mad respect to the fact that all these oddball characters are usable. Also know that a lot of these modes, characters, and arenas need to be unlocked. I just used the 100% completion sheet so I could show footage. Also, I want to bring back up those 5 bonus missions called flashbacks. I did not do them because they weren't required, but looking into them, they are legitimate extra missions with really cool bits of lore about how the several members joined the group, as well as some new locations, sick looking boss fights, and some never before seen gangs. And lastly, I can't go without discussing the extremely cool minigame available once completing the game and the flashback missions, that being Armies of the Night, a side-scrolling, more traditional beat 'em up in the style of Double Dragon. As you can guess, I did not beat it because it also wasn't required, but from watching gameplay, I can tell it had a ton of effort put into it and is definitely worth playing if you're a Warriors diehard. Before I wrap this up, I have to show you this developer interview I found regarding the game where he says one thing and the ending of Armies of the Night says another.
We are keeping true to the story of the Warriors. We're not raising Cyrus from the dead or anything crazy like that. It's pretty much true to the film. They don't want to give away too much.
Overall, I'm a massive fan of the Warriors. I think the game is just the perfect length and difficulty. Its gameplay and premise is incredibly unique, and the world and characters have so much charm. There's really no game like it. For the Warriors difficulty rating, I give it a 6 out of 10. For the most part, it was rather easy, but there were some clunky elements and some tricky parts I got stuck on. For the fun factor rating, I give the game an 8 out of 10 for its chaotic group battles, unique mission objectives, and satisfying combat. Add to it a story that makes you care about the characters, makes for not only a fun but thoroughly entertaining experience. Now, many might not be aware that there was actually another Warriors game after this named The Warrior Street Brawl. It has zero connection with Rockstar and is a traditional side-scrolling beat-em-up, very similar to the arcade game Armies of the Night. It appears many dislike the game, but I think it's cool that not only one game exists for this iconic film, but now 2. Rockstar related or not. Believe it or not, Rockstar did work on a follow-up for this game unrelated to the film, more as a spiritual successor. It was set to follow the 1960s feud between the mods and the rockers, but the game never got far. There is some concept art for it, but that's it. If you are looking for continued Warriors lore though, there is a comic miniseries made that details the events after the film, so check that out if you're really dying for some more Warriors content. With this game down, the running game time completion total raises to 316 hours. Catch you on the next episode.